Remember when Yoda was telling Luke, do or do not? There is no try, and then showcased his abilities with the Force as a 900-plus-year-old Jedi Master by lifting the X-Wing out of the swamp with ease. Oh. Released in 2008 for consoles and handhelds and in 2009 for the PC, it's Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. Developed and published by LucasArts for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, the game, however, is also available on the PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable, Nintendo Wii, Nintendo DS, mobile phones, and PC on both Windows and Mac OS X, and even the N-Gage, and was developed and published by all of these people for the other systems and ports of the game. What you're currently seeing on screen, however, is the PlayStation 3 version of the game and the Ultimate Sith Edition, which basically includes all of the DLC that was released for the game, in which you play as the darkest Starkiller, who now wears a mask because I actually have no idea why. But yes, The Force Unleashed is set between the events of New Hope and Revenge of the Sith, and you play as Starkiller, a secret assassin and apprentice of Darth Vader. You're tasked with basically wiping out the remaining Jedi in the galaxy and overthrowing the Hooded Lightning Man with Darth Vader, but things don't go quite as planned, and big shock, you get betrayed, and now you as Starkiller and insert love interest here, and homicidal robot and blind old man must defeat the Empire and spark the rebellion against the Empire. And you also have the DLC stuff, mostly in the form of costumes and such, but the first one, however, being the Jedi Temple, where you basically go through some Jedi trials, and it's like 30 minutes of puzzle solving, basically, as well as the Ultimate Sith Starkiller DLC, taking place across both Tatooine and Hoth, and acts as somewhat as a what-if scenario set after the events of the main campaign of the game, and basically you're tasked with putting an end to the rebellion, and you get to fight a few familiar faces. All while blasting stormtroopers and rebels and whatever else with force powers and lightning. But is any of it any good? Let's find out with the good. Now, as the title of the game states, The Force Unleashed definitely lives up to its name in that regard. You're basically walking death. Starkiller has some insanely incredible force abilities, all of which are fun and fairly easy to use and experiment with, as you upgrade them throughout the campaign of the game. Everything from force lightning to force throwing people, force throwing objects at people, to a variety of lightsaber combinations, to embedding your lightsaber with force lightning, the game makes you feel incredibly powerful and like a complete badass. This is pretty much the core entertainment to the gameplay of the game itself. You'll basically be mowing your way through stormtroopers and Jedi alike across a number of different planets in the galaxy. But to aid in the awesome force abilities, the game on a technical level has some very neat technology in the form of the Yuphoria physics engine, which basically added some incredible physics to the game for the time. Charging up a force blast and watching everything shatter into hundreds of pieces and go flying away never got old, and was always a joy to watch. And this being a Star Wars game, it's obvious the soundtrack is incredible. You've got a mixture of the now iconic John Williams theme in the game, which I sadly can't showcase because of copyright reasons, as well as some new material made for the game itself, which is surprisingly well done, my favorite being simply the main theme of the game itself. My next favorite aspect of the game are the different outfits and costumes you unlock by collecting the well-hidden holocrons scattered throughout the game, as well as tons of different lightsaber colors and variations you can play around with. As you'll see throughout this review, I always try to use a different color each stage, and I thought this was really neat. However, sadly, that's where my praise ends and my discussion of things that are neat come to an end. So now let's discuss the bad.
An enemy I've studied for years.
Now, as cool as the force powers are in this game and how incredibly powerful you are in this game, it's cool for a whole 10 minutes. When you're basically walking force lightning death, the next 7 hours of this game is basically a scenic walk in the Galactic Park, and honestly, that's my biggest issue with this game. It simply throws no challenge whatsoever your way and becomes dull quick. Mind you, I did play this on the normal difficulty setting simply because I assume the normal difficulty is the developer intended setting. However, if you do plan on playing or replaying The Force Unleashed, I highly recommend you crank the difficulty setting to the highest possible setting to get the most out of the game. Even when you're simply starting the game up for the first time and have very few abilities to play around with at first, you still basically have a lightsaber that cuts through stormtroopers like butter. In fact, come to think about it, I never once even died in actual combat during regular gameplay or even the boss fights. Honestly, the only times I even died in this game was accidentally falling to my death, or the one time a Jawa knocked me off a cliff while I was busy looking down said cliff. The combat in this game is so pathetically easy. Once I was fully upgraded to most of my Force abilities, it was rare for my health to even go down past 50%, since every time you kill an enemy in this game, it'll restore your health a little bit. But not only is the overall gameplay easy, the puzzle solving is as well. Every puzzle in this game is physics-based or involves you moving something with the Force, and takes no thought whatsoever to solve. The only challenge this game will even throw at you is finding the holocrons scattered throughout the levels, or completing the random bonus requirements of the levels themselves. My next issue with The Force Unleashed is the story of the game. Without spoiling anything for anyone interested in playing this game, the premise is very neat and interesting. Set before the events of New Hope as a secret apprentice of Darth Vader is a very cool concept. However, this game basically throws it out the window in favor of this shoehorn plot of Starkiller starting the actual rebellion itself, that would then lead into the events of New Hope, and the way it goes about it is in no way interesting. But thankfully, it's not even canon anymore either. Not to mention the love interest whose name I've already forgotten that has no character build-up in any way, but for some reason after being saved and such, falls in love with Starkiller, who, by the way, has the personality of a plank, and his basic emotions are this.
You agreed to stay away! I lied.
But even worse, the love interest has some of the most cringe-inducing dialogue I've ever seen since the prequel movies.
I glimpsed one bright spot, one beautiful thing he held on to, even at the end.
What?
You.
Now on a technical level, the game is a mixed bag, but mostly a mixed bag of bad textures and bad frame rate drops and pixelated, low-file-sized, pre-rendered cutscenes. Which sadly you can't really tell because of the YouTube compression, and Sony Vegas is fantastic at upscaling crap-quality footage. But trust me, the pre-rendered cutscenes of this game at times remind me of those giant billboards that use multiple screens to display a single image, and the cutscenes come off looking super bad and pixelated. However, as I mentioned in the good, the Yuphoria physics engine is very neat. However, everything else in this game looks extremely bland and runs poorly at times. Now, maybe it's just the PlayStation 3 port, I'm not sure, and I know this game is from 2008 and all, and it's over 7 years old now at this point, but even for a 2008 game, the texture work in this game is incredibly bad in some areas. As well as a ton of pop-in issues, things just randomly grow in front of you as you traverse some of the levels in this game, and that probably explains why most of the levels are extremely linear in hopes of you not noticing this. But sadly, in the more open areas of the game itself, it's extremely obvious. I also noticed while I was playing through the Ultimate Sith DLC of the game, the frame rate at times in some of the areas would simply tank to a crawl. It clearly had no optimization done for it sadly, and at times the DLC was almost running in slow motion. But with all that being said, now it's time I give the opinion. Overall, I believe Star Wars The Force Unleashed is a very bland third-person action-adventure game. However, it had some incredibly neat Force abilities and a physics engine that was cool for the time. But sadly, it was bogged down with a story that had a neat concept, but in my own opinion was poorly executed. Instead of being a super cool what-if experience, it instead gave me a shoehorn plot that would lead into New Hope. However, when the DLC gave me that cool what-if experience, it ran like hot garbage, and was more or less just watch as Darth Killer, or Star Vader, or Darth Icky, or whatever kills your favorite Star Wars characters. I remember thinking this game was fairly bland in 2008, but a lot of people seemed to love it, and I didn't really get why, and all these years later, I'm more or less wondering the same thing still, and why I even bothered playing it again. But now, with that being said, it's time for the rating. I give The Force Unleashed.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.